So everyone, thank you for joining us over your lunch hour. Welcome to the March Flash Talk. Today, I am so excited for this one. It's entitled The Kelsey Museum Botanical Collections from Karanis, Challenges and Opportunities for Dating Legacy Material with Radiocarbon Analysis. And I am joined today by Laura Motta, Assistant Professor of Environmental Archaeology. We are so excited to have you. Thank you for being with us today. As always, the format of the Flash Talk is about 15 minutes of the talk, and then we'll leave time at the end for questions. So everyone, if you wouldn't mind just muting yourselves during the talk, and then once we get to the question and answer portion, I will facilitate that, and you can put your questions in the chat or raise your hand and we'll call on you. So thank you so much. I will throw it over to Laura. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Yes, I was muted. Okay, thank you, all of you, for kind of being interested in listening what I've been doing recently. And sorry for the very long title, but this is, what the talk is going to be about. It's about radiocarbon dating of an important site for, that is the major contributor to the Kelsey collections, and some kind of, at the end, I will throw in some consideration in terms of what about destructive analysis of museum collections, what we need to think about that. And so let me start. Probably you know all about Karanis, but I will provide a very few words of introduction. Karanis doesn't go. Okay, now it goes. Karanis is a site, is a settlement in the Fayum oasis. I don't know if you see my arrow here, right? In Egypt. And it's a site that was funded with many other as a part of huge reclamation project in the mid 3rd century BCE, but in the Ptolemaic period. So after it has been abandoned in the late antiquity, it was covered by the encroaching desert that preserved the structures and preserved a crazy amount of organic material. So, because it's desert, so organic material preserved by desiccation. And this is not, might be usual in Egypt, but is not usual in archaeological sites to have such an abundance of organic material. So the site has been excavated by Kelsey, by Francis Kelsey, between the 20s and the 30s. And more recently has been the focus of investigation by the French Institute and by other teams. So the site has been known, right, and studied for more than 100 years now. But despite the huge amount of research and investigation that received, the chronological framework is still a little bit uncertain, especially in terms of the development of the site. So we know when it's been founded, but how it did develop through time, and when it was abandoned is still a little bit confused. And of course, the new excavation can provide a lot of precious evidence for that, but it's not been published yet. So Kelsey exposed a huge portion of the settlement and excavated domestic structures, production structures, roads, granaries, and so on and so forth. As I was saying, the dating is a little bit uncertain. At the moment, at the time, the site was dated with papyrological evidence and with coins. Um, uh, and here you see some example of them. Of course, many papyri were preserved. This is, of course, something that we wouldn't do right, with modern methods. But at the time, there was no ceramic typology, and so that was the only way to date the site. So, with the papyri and with the kind of sequence of levels that we're identifying, they organized the site in 4 or 5 levels and attributed the chronology of those levels and the structures that were excavated in those levels. The excavators themselves realized that this level system was not perfect, but has been used since then as the basis for the chronology of the site. And so the site had an expansion during, the 1st century CE, and according to papyrological and numismatic evidence, was declining in the 4th century and abandoned in the 5th century. So the excavation methods, of course, were different from the modern one, but still were kind of very, very advanced for the time. So we have here the Kelsey, a huge amount of archival material that includes maps, sketches, elevations, the division of objects, because some of the material has been left in Egypt and some was brought here to the Kelsey Museum. So despite being a 100-year-old excavation, we can actually, we have actually good documentation for it. And Kelsey was really, ahead of his time. So one of his aim was to provide a reconstruction of the environment of life in the Greco-Roman period. So, in a moment in which they were excavating the King Tut burial and they were kind of treasure hunting for, precious objects, the Kelsey excavation were collecting common pottery, everyday objects, tools, ropes, fabric, and that again was pretty unusual for the time. As I was saying, the desert preserved a huge amount of organic material. So that is why we can actually have, baskets that usually do not preserve, or yes, ropes. And this organic material was actually used and extracted as a fuel. Okay, it's called sebak, and you can see on the right there are huge accumulation of these layers of organic material. So that means, right, that in a way we are very lucky, because with all this organic material, we can date the context with radiocarbon dating. But there are some issues, okay? So we have a lot of wood, for example, furniture, timber for construction, everyday object, implements, but wood can be used and reused several times. And especially in desertic environment, it's a precious resource. And so, very often is not synchronous with the archaeological deposit that we want to date, that is older than the archaeological deposit that we want to date. And on top of that, wood itself, especially construction wood, timber that is used for construction, might be sourced from very old trees. And so again, also the age of the tree is already older than the archaeological context. So these are all issues that, prevent the use of wood as a good chronological indicator. Other material, as I said, includes everyday objects made of vegetal fibers and crops. Again, very, very good opportunities there, but we need to think about the formation processes of the archaeological assemblage. So we are in a desert environment or a margin of the desert at that time. And one thing that is happening today, but was happening also at the time, and that you have windstorm and sandstorms. And of course, everything that is light, like a sandal or a basket or a rope or a piece of papyrus, can really, be moved with the sand in a different location. So again, remixing older and younger material and not be a good chronological indication. And here you see an example of that, right? So we have a piece of basket that is stuck against the wall. So clearly it was kind of shifted and moved with the wind, who knows when, in antiquity, in the Middle Ages, or 20 years ago. The other kind of consideration is that when the settlement was abandoned, probably was abandoned in patches, and a lot of the context where organic material is being retrieved are actually trash, and trash is precious. Okay, it tells us a lot of good things, including that might be the trash of the house that was living close by. But again, you need to be very careful in using trash as dating material for the structures. So, and how you identify trash versus non-trash? Well, when you have a kind of random sandal or one peach stone, well, you might be suspicious. But when instead you have thousands, if not millions of seeds, okay, crops that has been stored or they are being found, concentrated in a spot or inside the original vessels, that probably is a good hint that we are not dealing with, with trash, but with something that has been left behind. And so a better way to date the structures, the abandonment of the structures, of course. And thanks for us, the kind of, Kelsey was collecting crops, and we have a huge collection of botanical material and crop remains here at the Kelsey. And this is very precious because, again, outside Egypt, this is pretty unique. And since the documentation, the recording system for the time was so meticulous, we know where these crops are coming from, from which structures are coming from which levels are coming from. And so we were able to do, some radiocarbon dating, thinking very carefully, right, what kind of material to use. The other consideration to keep in mind is that this material has been excavated 100 years ago and recorded 100 years ago, but we might not have recording of evidence of conservation practices. And so that, for example, is why also furniture might be not a good, a good place where to start with radiocarbon dating, because the paint itself might kind of alter the chronology, or conservation on the paint might alter the chronology. So crops are actually the best option where they are available. And here are the results. Without going into much details, what is happening here is that you see in different colors the different levels that Michigan established for the chronology of the site. And the horizontal axis are the centuries, right? Is the chronology. The vertical axis are our samples. The darker the darker boxes in the color band represent where the chronology of the levels established by the excavator should fit. And as you can see, our samples, okay, are not in the boxes. So basically do not fit the chronology of established for the site. And one thing that I would like you to notice is that not only do not fit, but they're not in sequence in the right way, meaning that the sea level should be older than the A level, but our dates attributed to the sea level, they're not all older than the dates in the A level. Actually, some of them are even more recent. So that really kind of, really tell us that these levels are not reliable, as it was already suspected, at all. But they can be used inside a building. So these buildings have been used and reused several times, and and sometimes, let me go ahead. As you can see here in this example, this is house C50. So the blue arrow is pointing to a moment in which the lower level of the house has been filled with sand. They build here a wall, okay, and they basically remodel the house on top and reuse some of the floors and add others. So the idea here is to go through the Kelsey collections and understand not only what can be dated in a structure like a silos, right, a column, establishing a kind of before and after sequence inside the same structure, but also to go to the structures that are around, okay, and on top and below, in a way to create a local sequence that is detached from the levels, but can produce a relative chronology of a single sequence of houses, or a single lot. So that again means we did a few radiocarbon dates. That means doing a lot of them and going through thousands and thousands of records. So is really this the best things to do? Meaning that that means destroying some of our collections. So there are some ethical considerations here. I would like to point out. Let me go to this image. Okay, I would like to point out that the context that has been selected, the kind of the collection items that has been selected, include really thousands, if not millions, of seeds that are all the same. Okay, they are kind of crops that have been cleaned and stored. And so in a way, for radiocarbon dating, we need like 5 seeds, 2 seeds, 10 seeds, depending on the crops and how much they weigh. So, the kind of knowledge that we gain, in a way, justify the destruction of a very, very, very small fraction of what we have. And it's not a fraction that is unique. Again, they're all the same species. So, it's not that we are losing any other kind of information. But yes, of course, any single context needs to be evaluated against, is a good choice to destroy some of it versus the information that we get. And why we want some of this information? Well, the Karanis, again, has been studied for a long time, but there is still a lot to do. Really a lot to do in terms of what we have here at the Kelsey. And the the information that we have here at the Kelsey are so, so precious because the site is, of course, eroded, has been, excavated, and the mud brick structures has been eroded by the desert. You see here the difference of some of the structures excavated in the 20s and some pictures that were taken in 2012, okay, of the same spot. So these structures are disappearing, and we have, again, an ethical responsibility to really publish all the knowledge that we can produce here at the Kelsey with the material that has been conserved here. And just to make my point, this is the same house. And this is, compared to, how it was when it was excavated. This is how it's been photographed by Nick Terrenato last year when he was at Karanis. So I'm happy to answer any question that you might have. This is, these are my 2 cents in terms of promoting the study of Karanis material. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was fascinating. Now is the time where we open it up to you, our audience, for questions. So if you would like to unmute yourself and ask your question, or you can put your question in the chat, and I would be happy to read it out. So feel free to ask Laura any questions you have.
Laura, I have a question. Can you talk a little bit more about, I found it fascinating, like we were talking about how you can't date the artifacts because they may have been windblown or swept or reused. Like, so how confident are you in the layering that the original excavators did for Karanis then?
Oh, no, I'm not confident at all. And
Okay.
I mean, it's not just me. I mean, most of the modern scholars are not confident, but that is what has been used so far, okay? And especially we're still waiting for, the results of the result of the excavation that has been done with modern techniques. Those the sand moves. So you're right. Not only the organic material moves, but the stratigraphy moves. Is it true that, of course, deep down in some of the basement of these structures, probably you have less movement compared to the top? But yes, I mean, it's not reliable. But the thing is that some of this material has been found on floors, okay? So, covered by the sand. And really looks from the photos, from the description, again, the documentation is amazing, that this can really be considered the moment of abandonment of the site and not remixed after. But yes, there is a huge work for every single, material that we decide to look at. There is, a lot of brainstorming and a lot of research in archives to find out basically why that material is there and how reliable it can be.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Laura, we have a question from Patricia. Are there other techniques besides radiocarbon dating that can be used on organic materials?
For dating, I mean, there are many other techniques that can be used, and indeed we are looking at nutrients, anti-nutrients, DNA analysis, so we can get a bunch of information out from this material. For dating, radiocarbon dating is the best option that we have.
Thank you so much. So Suzanne, it looks like you have raised your hand. Let's throw it over to you to ask your question.
I don't hear.
Suzanne, you're muted.
So I just said, like, thank you, Laura, for this amazing talk. It was really great. And
You're welcome.
yeah, thank you. So my question, as somebody who works with the Kelsey's collection of objects, of artifacts, is when, have you already or will you publish your information about the dates and link it to the structures? So like when we're working on finds from a particular structure, it would be great to know what the dates are. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so we have already written a paper about this first bunch of dates.
Mm-hmm.
And is in production. I mean, I know that we submitted last year and it's going to be out sometimes between May and June. Of course, Suzanne, you are very welcome to ask me also if it's not published, right? We can have a conversation about that. In the long term, absolutely. I mean, what we are doing with Tyler is to put together really any kind of information that we have in the structures that we are going to date. So, we are starting with the one we have the date for, and after, sooner or later, maybe in 20 years, everything is going to be done. But, we are starting with, the structures where we are able to do a sequence of dates vertically or in the neighbors in a way that we have, a box we can in which we can play in terms of chronology. And we are going to do possibly with the images, because again, with all the photographs, the movies, and the notes, some vertical stratigraphy in a modern way, right? Compared to, and we are going to publish all of that. And Tyler has already created a 3D model of the original terrain. And we are putting the houses inside the original terrain with the elevation because they recorded millions of points of elevation. And it's amazing how the reconstruction from the elevation in the GIS is actually is actually visually corresponding to the profiles that they have drawn into this. So, and we are going to use any data available to publish the context in a kind of modern sense of context in archaeological terms.
That's fantastic. I can't wait. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Carrie, it looks like you have a hand raised.
I do. Thank you, Laura. This is so fascinating. This is maybe a question I just need to ask you one-on-one later, but you had mentioned earlier that during this analysis, you had detected certain trace metals such as chromium in some of your sampling. And I don't know if that has any implications for dating or not, but are you finding it consistently throughout, or what's the significance there?
Oh, that I don't remember if it's a consistent thing or not. But for sure we can talk more about this because the postdoc that did the analysis is coming at the end of April and May. So we can look at the data together. It shouldn't be absolutely not a problem in terms of radiocarbon dating, because those are trace elements that are part of the seed, and and they're not also are not carbon, are not organic, so if they're not measured by yes.
Yeah, I'm interested in the pigments on
yeah, no, I
artifacts,
remember, right? Yes.
Yes, finding that element was surprising for me. So anyway, I'll follow up with you some more about this. It's really exciting.
Yes, Suzanne?
Yeah, we've also found, or Carrie rather, has also found bromine on a bunch of things. And so it would also be interesting to know if you see bromine in your trace elements.
I don't remember. I mean,
Okay.
because we did so many elements that
Right.
I don't remember if bromine is there.
Yeah, bromine and chromium are two confusing ones for us from the pigment perspective. So it
Well,
will
it was
be,
actually, oh, sorry.
oh,
The bromine was in wood,
right.
or on wood artifacts. So it could be that it was part of the wood of that in those particular artifacts, but yeah, that's another element.
Well,
Yeah.
that was my point when I was talking about the chromium, right? So if we have chromium in the seeds, not as a contaminant, right, but as a trace element that is absorbed by the seeds, that means that there was chromium around. So, so that's why I was thinking about the bedrock, if there is any kind of, or because I don't think, I mean, you don't have crops growing where you are preparing the pigment unless you are discharging the water of preparation of the pigments in your fields. So, but again, there is some brainstorming to do.
Yeah, so we know that I think we're looking for confirmation that the bromine and the chromium are coming from like the bedrock or from the environment, basically.
Yeah.
That's what we're looking for. Because
Yeah.
when you find those, it like in a pigment study, they're indicating kind of two different sort of interesting but complicated things. So it's actually, yeah, we're just looking for confirmation that they're coming from the environment.
Yeah. Okay. But we have something to do.
Yeah.
Together.
Thank you. That was such an interesting discussion. Anybody else have questions or comments they would like to add today? Well, as always, you can email me at stephkw@umich.edu or Laura as well. If you felt comfortable sharing your email,
Yes.
you can get in touch with us if you have further questions about this flash talk. I look forward to follow up possibly here, and as we continue to as you continue to conduct this research. Thank you so much, Laura, for being here with us over your lunch hour again, and thank you to everyone who joined us for this talk today. And you can again consult our website for further events and flash talks. Thank you so much, everyone.